Fog over Karl Marx Alley. The fog lay over Karl Marx Alley like a thin, grey veil, folding itself into the cracked cobbles and the soot-darkened facades. In late autumn 1978, East Berlin felt bent between two worlds, the mechanical discipline of the state and a quieter interior life where names, grudges, and sometimes whole destinies were hidden away. In a small rented room with paint flaking from the walls and a single window that let in only the streetlight's pall, two men sat opposite each other at a bare table. One of them, the old man, had hands that trembled only when he recalled those he had lost. The other was a younger man whose life was about to be rewoven into falsehood. "We give you a name," the old man said softly. "Hold it like a relic." It was not a blessing, it was a sentence and a promise rolled into one. For the agency that sent him, human beings were carriers of data, language ability, habits, the absence of a red flag. For the man in that dim room, the name was a bridge between a past and an identity he did not yet know how to carry. Chapter 1, Recruitment, where the man ends and the legend begins. They did not recruit heroes. They recruited pieces that could pass as whole people. The Stasi files were meticulous, in them were markings of discipline, schooling, language fluency, and the absence of military or dissident stains. For the KGB, that profile was rare currency, someone who could be presented as an American without a paper trail suggesting foreign origin. The process of recruitment was prosaic, almost bureaucratic: paperwork, interviews, psychological tests, long quiet conversations in windowless rooms. They probed for loneliness, for the ability to live inside a lie without cracking. They sought steadiness under boredom, steadiness under isolation. He was shown maps, not as geography but as patterns of opportunity and limit. He was told little, because the less he knew the less risk he posed. When he signed the documents, there was no heroic trembling. He had a choice: accept a predictable, safe future, or become someone else for something vast and invisible. He chose the latter, and in that choice lay the seeds of every conflict to come. Chapter 2, Training, the craft of the mask and tiny rituals of credibility. Training was long and meticulous, not a montage of glamour but a daily labor of mimicry. They taught him to be ordinary. Phrase by phrase, mannerism by mannerism, he rehearsed American small talk until gestures and inflections became muscle memory. They taught him which baseball team's name would sound natural in a local bar, which professors' names to compliment in a faculty hallway, what local grocery brands meant to a neighborhood. He read old newspapers the way an actor studies a character: advertisements, obituaries, classified notices. He learned how Americans arranged their lives in tiny rituals, the cadence of parent-teacher meetings, the offhand references in newspaper columns, the cadence of campus email. The training's aim was not to create a spy who could shoot or sabotage, it was to create a man who would not be suspected because he was, in every small way, credible. Inside the training bubble, truth was a functional thing: perform your role with absolute fidelity and the lies around you will hold. He learned to be emotionally economical, never overshare, never seem rehearsed, never betray curiosity where curiosity could be a flaw. Honesty inside the mask was a religion: be honest with those you claimed to be, accept the lie you were given, and the world would not pry. Chapter 3, Crossing, O'Hare and the Art of Being Unremarkable. Chicago's O'Hare was the kind of ordinary cathedral that swallows people's specialness in its fluorescent light, the rustle of suitcases, the smell of coffee, the mechanical roll of crowds. He walked through customs with a forged passport and a real American birth certificate, documents the KGB had exhumed and stitched into his new life. The birth certificate belonged to Jack Barsky, a boy who had died at 11. That paper was a key: it allowed him to enter not as a foreigner escaping across borders but as a son returning home. He kept his face still. Inside, a quiet thud of nerves; outside, the gait of someone who belongs. He scanned the city with the appetite of an anthropologist: bus routes, late-night diners, the rhythm of lecture halls. He selected ordinary seams where one could hide in plain sight: library stacks, academic seminars, faculty coffee hours. He took the persona of the professor because the role demanded attentiveness, quiet authority, and a habit of being believed. Chapter 4, The Bubble of Truth, Living in Lies while remaining true to a core. A double life becomes a long exercise in micro-choices. He constructed a routine: work during the day, readings at night, meaningless conversations with neighbors about weather and local sports, each small act a stitch in a fabric meant to never show its seams. The more he performed ordinariness, the more ordinary he seemed; the more ordinary he seemed, the safer he became. Yet inside the bubble a private sincerity remained. He was honest with those he allowed close, students who sought advice, neighbors who needed a favor, limited, deliberate honesty. Bonds formed, a student who came to office hours with personal doubts, a neighbor who asked for help installing a bookshelf, a laundromat woman who overcharged and then apologized with a laugh. Each relationship tightened the moral tension. Could he sacrifice people who trusted him on the altar of a cold mission? At night he would unfold the birth certificate of Jack Barsky and let the paper's thinness remind him what his life had cost. The ghost of a boy he never knew was the scaffold for his every move. The first transmission, quiet, uneventful, handed through a park in an envelope, felt like a ritual. It confirmed the system was working. It also forced him to confront the question that would haunt him: how to remain humane while serving a cause that could commodify human lives. Chapter 5: Sewing Cracks. After months of flawless invisibility, his tasks changed. What began as observation and small intelligence collection shifted to a subtler, more corrosive mission: amplify existing tensions inside the United States. The strategy was not spectacular violence but slow attrition: inject doubt, leak half-true facts, nudge local disputes into the national bloodstream. He was no ideologue, he was a technician of influence. His remit was to create small, repeated tremors: an anonymous letter to an editor, a carefully timed rumor in a campus circle, a misdirected memo that fed suspicion into a policy debate. These acts were meant to be invisible on their own, together they were meant to alter the tempo of trust. The network he helped sustain was decentralized and compartmentalized. It reached across academic circles, certain tech labs, community activist groups, and the edges of local politics. He found people with grievances, people with debts, people with thirsts for recognition, and he stitched them into operations without letting them know the full pattern. Each recruit increased the network's reach and increased its fragility. Chapter 6: A Delicate Web and Doubts Within. Tension unspools in details. Patterns emerged where none should be: two contacts citing the same odd source, a phrase repeated in different private chats, a money transfer that had no immediate explanation. On their own, these anomalies were benign. In aggregate they suggested a design. He watched fatigue settle into his contacts. Ambition and resentment bent some toward risk, others grew clingy, seeking more direction than he could ethically or operationally give. The human cost of recruitment became visible. He saw a young assistant start to drink more, another person's marriage fracturing under pressure. The network's seams showed stress. He felt his own patience fray. The more people involved, the more likely a single act of carelessness would expose them all. Chapter 7: Shadows on Screens, Monitoring and First Suspicions. On the other side of the hemisphere, analysts painstakingly traced noise into pattern. The FBI, CIA, and other agencies were used to complaints about clumsiness and oversight, but they had grown sophisticated at pattern detection. They fed databases and human reports into analytic queries, watching for statistical blips, sudden themes in social chatter, unusual financial activity, and contacts that crossed otherwise unconnected circles. The apparatus for counterintelligence had matured to meet the Soviet threat in its many disguises. Tech-savvy teams fused metadata, human tips, and open-source signals. A few irregularities would not raise alarm, but several correlated irregularities did. The analysts, patient and methodical, treated the work like a slow excavation: small clues uncovered, catalogued, and cross-referenced. Chapter 8: People Start to Pull Threads. Investigations are rarely cinematic, they are human labor: calls made, interviews logged, leads chased. A graduate student's offhand observation about a professor who always asked oddly specific questions, a landlord's note about late-night visitors, a deceptive bank log that suggested offshore routing, all were tiny items on a long checklist. Each item could be noise. Together they were a pattern. The key to unraveling a clandestine network was not brute force but human relationships. An old informant, a disgruntled relative, a small talk at a bar, all of these could reveal the soft underbelly of the operation. The counterintelligence teams did not shout. They watched, assembled, and waited for a safe opening. Their patience turned into pressure, pressure turned anomalies into a pointing finger. Chapter 9: The Mistake, Excess Trust. He made the inevitable human error. Trying to stabilize a shaky node in his network, he confided a small but telling detail to a new recruit, something not vital to the mission but corroborative enough to tie separate incidents together. The young recruit, either careless or seeking favor, repeated the detail in a conversation that found an unintended witness. That witness passed it along. A casual barroom conversation became a lead. It was always the human moment that betrayed the system. History is full of operations undone by vanity, pity, or the natural hunger for story. One small piece of information, imperfect and poorly guarded, can fold into another and reveal a design. That was what happened. He felt it in the cold slide of realization. A thread had been plucked. Chapter 10: The night the web became visible. The work of months coalesced into a single profile. Metadata matched bank traces matched travel matched strange phrases in emails. The arch of the network, once invisible, took on shape. For him the revelation came not as handcuffs or yelling, but as quiet professionalism. Two agents in plain clothes entering a lecture hall, polite questions, small notebooks, and eyes that were not cold but infinitely patient. They did not crash down on him like a movie raid. They engaged him in conversation. They showed him materials he had not expected to see. That calmness was a kind of violence, the realization that the fabric that had held his double life had been inspected and found pierced. He understood, in a clinical and private way, that the operation had become visible. Chapter 11: Intersecting Jurisdictions, Pressure, Diplomacy, and Calculus. When agents trace foreign influence back to a human node inside the country, the problem becomes bureaucratic and diplomatic at once. It stops being strictly a criminal foxhunt and becomes a political chess game. Who to tell, how loud to go, what to reveal to Congress, all mattered. The United States had to weigh embarrassment against the need to demonstrate vigilance. Publicity could compromise sources and methods, silence could allow other cells to prosper. The state moved across two planes, visible law enforcement and invisible diplomacy. Notes were sent between capitals, quiet apologies and heated demands were exchanged behind closed doors, and managers argued about timing. The public narrative had to be controlled without showing weakness. That calculus shaped the next moves. He was not only a suspect, he had become evidence in a geopolitical argument. Chapter 12: The Interview, a Mirror Game. They brought him into a room that was bright but not theatrical. The questioning was soft, methodological. They presented timelines, bank records, intercepted phrases. They wanted to know motive as much as method. What had he believed he was building? He heard his own life explained back to him in third person, sober, bureaucratic, and damning. He tried various responses: denial, rationalization, confession of obedience, a fractured attempt at deflection. In the room he watched a different world construct itself. His old mentor's commands sounded small compared to the ruin his actions could cause to ordinary people. The interrogators were not theatrical torturers, they were archivists of proof. Their calmness did not mean mercy. It meant they had counted pieces, and the pieces fit. Chapter 13: The Cost of Exposure. When the network was peeled open, damage rippled outward. People who had trusted him, students, colleagues, contacts, found themselves scrutinized, interviewed, sometimes fired or publicly embarrassed. His own friends saw in him the ultimate betrayal, others, a tragic instrument. The mission's tactical objectives, seeded unrest, eroded institutional trust, did not achieve their grand strategic aims. Instead, the human cost mounted. He discovered what the old men back in training always hinted at but never fully explained: operations are paid for in people. A single broken life is not a calculation on a ledger, it is a story that multiplies into other stories. The agency in Moscow spun damage control, papers were shredded, routes were closed. But the human scars endured, and they showed that in covert action the innocent, the gullible, and the ambitious often pay the highest price. Chapter 14: Results and an Unsettling Silence. The operation had not achieved the sweeping collapse its masters imagined. It did reveal, however, a painful truth about modern influence: small, repeated irritations can change conversations inside a society, but clinical outcomes are elusive. The United States had shown it could detect and remove an illegal in its midst, not by showy raids but by accumulation of small proofs, patient analytics, and human intelligence. He stood afterwards in a lecture hall, chalk dust on his sleeve, trying to speak of Roman republics and shifting alliances while the world outside rearranged itself. The quiet of the room felt like a verdict. He had been an instrument and, in that role, a witness to how states shape and ruin lives in secret. He realized, belatedly, that neither side in that shadow war ever produces pure heroes, each creates something more ambiguous. Epilogue, the bigger picture. He had entered America with a paper and a forged name, expecting to be invisible by virtue of being native. He had been invisible for years. Then small seams showed, curiosity followed, and the state's patient mechanisms closed. The work that had begun as training, improvisation, and the reproduction of a persona ended in quiet unmasking. His life would never be single anymore. He was a man between identities, neither fully himself nor fully the ghost he had been taught to be. This story is not about triumph or defeat alone. It is about the grinding machinery of intelligence, about the small human choices that tilt the fate of many, about how statecraft and personal conscience collide in rooms where no one keeps a hero's ledger. The legacy of such an operation is not measured only in headlines or policy shifts, it is measured in the faces of those whose livelihoods were interrupted, whose trust was violated, and whose names became part of a dossier forever. Appendix: How the Counterintelligence Apparatus Worked, Narrative Integration. The United States counterintelligence apparatus in this tale combined patient-human work with technical pattern analysis. Analysts cross-referenced banking anomalies, travel logs, odd behavioral reports from academic networks, and seemingly trivial speech patterns. Technology amplified old craft, encrypted radio bursts were monitored, metadata fused with human testimony, and steady pressure allowed for careful entrapment rather than theatrical arrests. Special units and tactical doctrine were not the main actors here. Instead, patient collection and interagency cooperation did the heavy lifting. For the agent, the tools of trade were less sensational, practiced normalcy, patience, and his willingness to adopt a life entirely foreign to his past. For the investigators, the tools were archives, databases, and the human capacity to notice patterns where others saw randomness.